It makes a lot of sense that a young kid, an illiterate kid like Joris Rapalje, and he was a kid. I have adult children several years older than him, got on a boat that, he was solicited by some weirdos from Amsterdam with some new fangled company called the West India Company. Hey, 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 get on this boat, get on this boat. And his leverage was, I'll get on the boat if you marry me and my girlfriend. And that was his major requirement. And sure enough, about a week later, they had a minister marry them, and they threw them on the boat, and here they come. And they were some of the first immigrants of European descent to this new world.
And some of them were also married at sea. I remember from Kathleen Tricot's testimony again. The judge that took the testimony also wrote to Governor Dongan. He said, she told me also that 5 couples were married at sea. So they were all young people, but they wanted to be married upon arriving in the colonies. So the idea that it would give them stability also to be married couples instead of loners.
It's interesting. I mean, it says a lot about
Mm.
just the institution of marriage in general, doesn't it? That we're not going over there as singles, not in 1624. We need to be united in many different ways, and that was one of the key ways. And sure enough, they started a family right away. Because Sarah was born in 1625 in the summer, early
Yeah.
spring,
It
early
starts a
summer.
family. It starts a family, and it starts a society. It gives a basis for society as well. So this proves that, yeah, there was, and jumping back on what Bertrand said, what the company wanted as well. The company wanted to build a society in the new world. So this proves that too.
Now, the other thing I would like to ask you to talk about, articulate a little bit, is that okay? So when these Walloons came, they were technically the boots on the ground. This round robin was a a document that I believe had 56 heads of families who had signed and said, we are willing, able, and ready to go to the new world. We will go. And again, their major requirement was you can't break us up, like the English said they were going to. They were going to send us down to Virginia and then up here and then over there. No, we stay together, but we will go and colonize your colony. So it was not Dutch that were the boots on the ground in this new Dutch colony called New Netherland.
Let me start with the round robin and the idea of founding a colony, because at the time they were called provinces, and the colonies were within provinces, communities, I guess, of people of the same religion and the same language. And I think the language is definitely a factor here, because you find the same thing with the Huguenots. At the beginning, they wanted to be together, and they wanted to intermarry because most naturally they wanted to be with people who spoke French. So the Walloons, even though one would have to check carefully individually, because since it's late in the migration, the migration must have started in the 1580s, amplified in the 1590s, I would say. So the 1620s, you may have second generation people who were born I mean, among the younger among them were probably born in the Netherlands already. But the other thing I wanted to say is that the United Provinces were a place of immigration, not emigration. And that's why in New Netherlands there was always a lack of settlers, hence also the development of slavery. But anyway, to go back to Leiden, because the Netherlands, the United Provinces were seen as a place for refugees, Jews, Protestants, and maybe even later Catholics, by the way. So it's very important to keep that in mind. So there was a pool of settlers available, foreign settlers, that is non-Dutch settlers, or children of people who were not Dutch, that were available.
And now they the Walloons came, they were available and they were willing. They were here. They were the boots on the ground. But there was it was essentially two societies, two cultures who were not all that similar living amongst each other, intermingling as one new burgeoning society, and that was the Dutch along with the Walloons.
Well, I'll just say a couple of words and then I'll leave Virginie continue. But I just want to say something funny is that, I mean, funny for a country small as the United Provinces because even to European standards, it's a relatively small country, is that they took the Walloons for Southerners, exuberant Southerners. Who spoke differently. I mean, Flemish is not Dutch. It may sound the same to us, but it's not. So it's Dutch with a Southern accent, let's say. And so this is interesting because to the Dutch, they were not Dutch, obviously. Even if what is being Dutch in the 1640s, when you are in the middle of a war of independence, I'll let Virginie explain this to us. But anyway, so this is differently. They were perceived as different, not just French speaking, but different.
Different, but indeed, what is being different at the time? Because when we think of the Dutch, the other thing we think about is Holland. And most of the migrants didn't come from Holland. They went through Holland, obviously, because they went through Amsterdam. But they came from Gelderland, they came from Groningen, and so on and so forth. They were farmers, most of them, because there were farming colonies that were founded in New Netherlands. I'm thinking of Rensselaerswijk, for instance. The patroonship of Rensselaerswijk is founded by Kilian van Rensselaer, but also he's associated with some of the Walloons and Huguenots at the time. So some of the settlers were Dutch speaking, but indeed this is a territory that is very varied. That there are very various forms of being Dutch, and this is this variety that characterizes the population coming to New Netherlands, I believe.
It was really a melting pot right out of the gate. Well, it was at least a salad bowl right out of the gate, right? And you had Walloons and Dutch here right away.
To add another French to the mix, you could quote from Isaac Jogues, who went to New Amsterdam in 1643 and said that there are I don't know how many languages are spoken on Manhattan Island. He made a number that was
18, I think.
18, yeah. And maybe it's just the feeling he had, but it says a lot about the diversity of the population, of the European population, and you have to add to that the native population and the enslaved Africans.
Yes, and we get to that shortly after this period. But I think it's interesting when we start to look at the intermingling of these two, the Dutch and the Walloons particularly. And you mentioned Kilian van Rensselaer. So when Kilian van Rensselaer had launched his patroonship, essentially, which is basically a fiefdom that he becomes sovereign lord over, more or less. It's interesting that the people that came over on the Rensselaerwyck, which was the name of his ship, named for his patroonship, included Jesse de Forest's children, including Hendrik, Isaac, and Rachel, who would marry Jean de la Montagne, who we get very, very involved with in our podcast. And again, there's an example of these two societies right away. They're in because Uncle Gerald or Gerard was in business with Rensselaer, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's Gerard who was in business with Kilian. Yeah.
Hey, let me add something because you mentioned a series of first names. I want to add something that maybe the American audience doesn't know, would not recognize, at least if they are Protestant, is that what is particular to the Walloons and the Huguenots was to use first names from the Bible, especially the Old Testament. And it was they were recognized right away with their first names. You wouldn't find Catholics named Judith, Rachel, Isaac, Samuel. You would find Jews, but not Catholics. As for, of course, you have Jean, because Jean and Louis are names of kings, so you find them, among Protestants and Catholics. But this is something that is interesting in the source If you work on the Huguenots, for example, you sometimes you have a first name that is typically Huguenot for a French person, and you know that they were not Catholics. So it's an interesting way to recognize them in the sources.
And you also see why it explains why a lot of them have the same names. there's a lot of Jeans and a lot of Rachels and a lot of Sarahs and a lot of Hendricks and a lot of Isaacs. So now, for people who have not completed season 1 of Island, and shame on them, but they can go back and do that anytime. Virginie, tell us who Jesse DeForest was, please.
Jesse DeForest, Jesse DeForest, as we would say in French, was a Walloon. He was born in Avesnes-sur-Helpe in present-day northern France, and he was a dyer. A dyer in northern France, and then in Leiden. He served for Prince Maurice of Nassau as a lieutenant and captain. And then he was the leader actually of the Walloon and Huguenot community in Leiden. So he was the one who assembled families to migrate to America. So he was the one who petitioned, one of the 56 who petitioned the Virginia Company, and then he petitioned the West India Company and assembled the Walloon families who migrated to Manhattan. Although he himself probably never set foot on Manhattan. Actually, shortly after that, he went to I don't know how you say it in English, actually, to French Guyana, maybe,
Yes.
to explore the territory. And this is where he met his maker, and he died on the Oyapock. But basically, he was a leader of the Walloon Huguenot community in Leiden, and he was one of those who organized the migration of the community on the other side of the Atlantic.
There's so much irony in this story. And I refer to Jesse DeForest as the Moses of Manhattan, who never made it to Manhattan.
Yeah. But his daughter and 2 of his sons made it to Manhattan and became major figures in New Netherlands. His daughter Rachel married Jean de la Montagne, which we'll talk about some more later.
Okay, so the DeForest family, Jesse never made it, though he was the sort of lead person in that extended DeForest family who was pushing for, a proponent of this place, this new colony of New Netherland. But his 2 sons, Hendrik and Isaac, and his daughter Rachel did make it here, and his daughter married his protege, or whatever you might want to call it, Jean de la Montagne. They were very close. Jesse and Jean de la Montagne went to French Guiana together when it was under control of the Dutch, and La Montagne was with Jesse when he died over there. Then had to come back and report the news to Rachel and her mom, Marie, and that's when Rachel and he looked at each other in a different way, and then they were married the next year. But La Montagne is an interesting figure because he almost encompasses the entirety, he does really, of the entire duration of the existence of New Netherland as a colony, because he's there, he's involved in many ways in the 1620s. He arrives in the 1630s, but he had already gone over as part of the Dutch West India Company's explorations in 1623. And he remains in New Netherland in various posts until the English take it over.
He was a member of the government of New Netherlands. He was a member of the council at some point. But Jean de la Montagne was also he was educated. That's important to note too. He's usually labeled as Dr. Jean de la Montagne. He was the surgeon of the colony, so he, in that respect, he gained actually respect in the colony for his part as the surgeon and as a member of the council.
Bertrand and Virginie, merci, merci, mes amis. We look forward to continuing this fascinating conversation of our very own Manhattan Pilgrims next week. Join us then, folks. Vedant. Island Voices is a production of Chance Kelly, Inc. and may not be reproduced or re-exhibited in any manner, in whole or in part, without authorization. Thank you.